Hello everybody and welcome back to the Dovetail box series. In this video we're going to get the rebates cut on the bottom of the lid. Let's get going. Okay, so the rebates are going to be used in order to locate this lid front to back and stop that movement from happening. A rebate is a right angle cut out the corner of a piece of material, usually in order to house a panel or something like that. It's a very basic and common woodworking joint and it's perfect for this instance. Now there are so many different ways to cut rebates. You've got table saws, you've got planers, jointers for you Americans out there, you've got routers, router tables. In this video, I'm going to be showing you the hand tool method, however, which is either using a shoulder plane or a rebate plane. So I'll be doing one side with the shoulder plane and I'll be doing one side of the lid with the rebate plane. But I would like to stress that I'm not going to be demonstrating how to do this with machine or power tool because this is mainly a hand cut joinery project, and although that would be a lot easier, those of you with limited space and limited budgets will find these two options a lot better for you. So in order to size these rebates, I'm going to take this lid off and I'm going to set a marking gauge to the thickness of the inside wall, and this needs to be absolutely spot on. So I'm happy with that setting. This will only work if that lid is a perfect fit in the box and it's perfectly flush on all those outer edges. If it's not, then you may have a few issues with this. So make sure it's perfectly flush on the outer edges. If you've accidentally made that lid just a fraction too small, then what you'll need to do is set this marking gauge so that it's sitting on top of the walls rather than sitting flush with that inside edge. This will stop that lid rocking side to side even after the rebate's been cut. That setting is then going to be scratched on the underside of the box lid, and make sure to make that pretty prominent. You want a definite line to work to here. And now we need to work out how far down we want this rebate to drop. So at the moment this lid is flush with these top edges. Don't worry too much about that because once this rebate is cut and that lid drops down, you can just plane these top edges down so that they're level with the top of the box. In the previous episode, because the lid was so twisted, by the time I flattened it off, it made this a bit thinner than I expected. So I don't want to make that rebate too deep because it means that the material sitting on top of this top surface will be a bit thinner than I want and it might be slightly fragile. So I'm probably going to go for, I don't know, a 3mm deep rebate, I reckon. That should be all this lid needs in order to hold itself in place. So once again, I'll take the lid off and this marking gauge setting is going to be pushed on the underside of the lid and scratched up the sides like that. Again, make it nice and deep so you can easily see where you're working to. And then I will just scribble the areas that I want to remove just for demonstration purposes, I suppose. So there you go, you can see what we're removing here, about 3mm down and then the thickness of the sides across. So we've got two different methods to cover here. To start with, I'm going to show you how to do it with the shoulder plane. So in order to do this, you're going to need a nice long piece of material with a perfectly straight and square edge. At least it has to be square to the bottom face that it's resting on. So that will go on your lid and needs to be clamped right up against that line. Okay, so that is not going anywhere now and it's right up against that line. And what we're going to be doing with this shoulder plane is utilising that lovely flat surface we've got on the side and pushing that against this fence and cut down to depth. Now what you need to bear in mind with this is that shoulder planes, or at least the blades in shoulder planes, are not always flush with the side of the tool. So on here I need to push this edge against the fence and then cut down to depth, but the blade is sticking out slightly from this surface. So I know the top of this maple is nice and flat, and in order to flush off that blade, I'm going to lay it flat like that, loosen off this bar that's putting pressure on the blade, and just push it down so that it's nice and flat on that surface. Tighten this up slightly, and then that's fine. So that is now sitting flush with this surface, and thus can go up against the maple without cutting into it and pushing the plane out of square. And it's just a case now of keeping it held into that fence and being careful not to cut below this line that I've scored on the side. So I'm approaching that line now, and once again I'm looking for that little wispy bit of material poking up above the marking gauge line, much like we did in the last episode where I was thicknessing the lid. just started appearing on that front edge there. There you go, so I'm feeling it evenly all the way along. So I'll just work on those long, even strokes now. And as you can see, using a shoulder plane like that is a lovely method of cutting rebates. It's so precise, and also if I cut this second rebate and I find out that actually I didn't make it deep enough, the shoulder plane is a tool that's able to go in like this and actually make that rebate slightly deeper in order to fit into the box. The rebate plane, as I'm about to show you, won't do that very easily. However, it is very good at cutting rebates. If you could only get one of the two tools, a shoulder plane is definitely the one to go for. You'll find it very useful in this, but also versatile in a ton of other applications. But before I start going off on that tangent, let's get the other rebate cut. So I was just about to show you how to use this rebate plane, and I realized that I have misplaced the fence that should be attached to it on these bars. I've looked everywhere for it, I can't find it, so we're gonna have to fast forward a few days to wait for delivery for a new one. The things I do for this series, eh? The things I do. Okay. So I've got the fence. Now let's quickly talk about the setup of this thing and then we'll cut the rebate. So despite initially looking somewhat confusing with all these knobs all over the place and then a couple of places to put the blade and all these things going on with it, it's actually a pretty simple tool to use. You've got two locations for the blade, one of which can be mounted at the front so you can get closer to corners and stuff like that if you're using this plane. And then you've got this position here, which is probably used like 90 to 100% of the time, to be honest. I've rarely ever needed to use this side. Underneath, you've got a adjustable fence, which is unlockable through these two nuts here, and then that will slide forwards, well, sideways, I suppose, and that will control the depth of the rebate in terms of how far in it goes. Now, you'll notice that part of the blade is masking taped off, and that is because when you use this plane, you often want to push the fence with your fingers from underneath to keep it in the cut, stop it from rocking, and just make sure it's properly grounded in the cut. And if you haven't got that masking tape there and you're pushing this fence, it's very easy to just take your hand away and catch your finger on the corner of the blade there, which happens quite often in some of the classes that I used to teach. In fact, I think in one of the classes it happened to 3 people before I realized, I should probably fix this. So a few layers of masking tape prevents that from happening, and then you've still got access to the part of the blade, once you get rid of all this rubbish, that you need to use. And then in addition to all that, on this side there's a depth stop which prevents this thing from cutting further than you need to. Now in reality, I don't really use this too much. I just tend to work down to a marking gauge line and do it all by eye. But if you're doing a bunch of rebates that you don't really want to focus on too much, you just sort of want to get it done, then set this depth stop to the required depth and just keep planing until it stops. So I'm going to bring this depth stop up and out the way because I'm not going to be using it in this instance. I'm only cutting one rebate, so there's no point in having it, to be honest. Similar to the shoulder plane, I just need to make sure that this blade is sitting perfectly flush with the side of the tool. If it's not, when this descends in the cut, you end up sort of getting these kind of steps on this inside wall. So the first one will be on the line, the next one will be slightly offset, and you get this staircase going down the rebate. So in order to get it so it's a perfect right angle in there, make sure that that blade is perfectly flush with the side of the plane. So I'm just pushing a flat wooden block against the side to do this, and then we'll clamp the lid in the vise. And in this instance, because the lid is going to get pretty thin on the edge here, I'm actually going to get it flush with the front of the workbench and use this lovely flat large face that I've got as a reference surface, or as an additional reference surface for the fence on the plane to prevent it from tipping and make sure it stays at 90 degrees. So I've completely removed the depth stop so you can easily see what's going on now. And I am shifting this fence in order to get that blade lined up perfectly with the marking gauge line. Okay, so after a bit of fiddling, the fence is now set and I've managed to get it parallel to the marking gauge line. It does every now and then involve a little bit of like wrenching round of this fence in order to get this side in line with the marking gauge line, because sometimes on older planes the fence doesn't quite lock parallel, and yeah, I had to sort of force it a bit, but we're locked in position now. The only thing I've got set is the depth of the cut, as I would with any normal plane, by pushing it forward and then advancing the blade as I do so until it starts biting. Now, When you cut a rebate, obviously the thing that you want to do is start here and then push through to the very end. However, by doing so, you've got this whole length of timber for the blade to potentially start tracking the grain and veer off course. It's not so much going to be the case with this poplar, but if you're working with oaks and ash and things like that, then it might be an issue. In order to prevent this from potentially tracking the grain, what you're going to need to do is create a track for the plane to actually fall into. And the way you do that is by starting the shaving from here and taking a pass that's probably about 10 millimeters long. And then you shift back a bit, take another pass, shift back a bit, take another pass. And in doing so, you create a small rebate to start with, which has only got that much room to potentially track the grain. So in that distance, it's not going to do anything. And then once you extend that cut, it's then got the previous cut to fall into, and so on and so forth. By the time you get to the end, you've pretty much got a fully established rebate along the entire length, and it shouldn't track the grain as easily, I will disclose. So let's bring this out until it starts cutting. There we go. So we've got a little shave in there. So we'll start at the very end, little pass, making sure that all the pressure is pushing in on the fence and also down into the material. Don't want any of this rocking going on. Slightly extend it again. You see I'm just gradually working back. All right, so we're about halfway now. And when I'm doing this, you'll see I'm using the technique that I shared in my video, how to plane correctly, where you get your arms sort of locked in the position where they need to be. Make sure the plane isn't tilting, and then just hold it there while you do the actual movement with your feet. Lovely. And now we've got a pretty fully established rebate along the entire length, and I just need to plane it down to the depth of the marking gauge line on the side. So the rebate's obviously a little bit deeper at the front compared to the back because we've taken more passes there than we have here, but I'll sort that out once I get closer to the line. Okay, so I'm on the line at the front or just above it because that flaky material has appeared. So we'll do a few passes at the front now. We'll get it so that flaky material is along the entire length of the rebate, and then we'll just take a couple of final passes to get it nice and smooth. Okay, so just a few places to sort out now. And remember, when you do this, keep focusing on keeping the plane square. Don't start letting it rock and be lazy. Right, we're there. Okay, so a few long passes now. So let's see if it fits in the box. Not quite, not quite. So the rebate wasn't quite cut in far enough, but this is the beauty of the shoulder plane, because the shoulder plane is able to adjust this. So we're going to be using the shoulder plane on its side in order to increase the depth of the rebate, and I'm going to pick the one that looks the most ragged out of the two of them, because we've done two different methods here. And to be honest, the one that I did with the shoulder plane is looking cleaner than the one I actually did with the rebate plane. Every now and then you'll get sort of like this fluffy edge on the inside where that blade is digging into it slightly, and like all sorts of reasons, but that's the one I'm going to clean up. Now to start with, because I'm putting the plane on its side like this, I need to make sure that the blade is flush with that side. So I'll loosen this, push it down on the surface, and then tighten it up so that I know when I use this on its side, it's not going to start cutting into the surface below. And holding it at 90 degrees, so I'm just sort of rocking it until I feel it lock into that corner, and then keep my hands locked in that position and just let my body carry it through. And you know what, in doing this, it feels like I actually might be cutting against the grain or something not quite nice going on there. So if I flip it round and work on this side, so then flipping the plane over, I need to reflush it. Right, so feel it lock into the corner. Just test the fit real quick. And to be honest, I wouldn't find it surprising if it fits one side before the other. However, these still need, they still both need a little bit of adjusting. So you see, this is why the shoulder plane is just a bit more versatile than the rebate plane, because you would struggle to make this adjustment with the rebate plane and the fence set. It would just start wobbling all over the place. Okay, so it's just catching on this side, and this one, a little bit more needed. Okay, so we're in there, but once again, it's not going to be a pleasurable experience to take that lid off when it's in use, despite it being a very good fit in terms of woodworking. Right, so that's now a pretty good fit in there. It just takes a little bit of pressure to get that out, but it is still somewhat of an interference fit. So I'm going to do one skim on each side, I reckon. And then when it comes to sanding the box, once that material has been removed and I'm able to reevaluate the fit of the lead, I'll work out if it's worth making that adjustment or not. Now, I do want to reiterate that sanding is for finishing and cleanup only. If you rely on sandpaper, such as your trusty 80 grit, in order to shape these rebates, or even, I see some people flushing off joints and stuff with sandpaper. If you do that, it just doesn't look good at the end of it. Sandpaper will somewhat round the surface you're working on as opposed to get it flat, and you lose the overall crispness of the piece that you're working on. So sandpaper is not for shaping. However, in saying that, obviously, to some extent, it will remove material, and that amount of material may be the difference between this being an interference fit, like it currently is, and being a perfect fit after it's sanded. Like I say, I'm going to reevaluate that once the sanding happens. I'm not going to do it now, because if I sand the box and then put this pre-sanded lid on it, it might end up being wobbly, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be a good fit right now. Yeah, really good. So once I clean up the rebates with sandpaper, that should make that a pretty perfect fit. But that is it for this lesson. So just to go over everything we said again, you've got a couple of choices when it comes to doing this. If you've got a router table, use that. However, if you have a choice between a shoulder plane or a rebate plane, I would definitely go for the shoulder plane in this instance, because it will easily cut that rebate, and it's a little bit more versatile when it comes to cleaning up the rebate afterwards, and you'll find a use for it in many other applications in the future as well. This is the Veritas medium shoulder plane, which is my favorite one. It's got a lot of nice features about it. It's got a decent blade in it, and it's just nice to use. So there is a link to this in the description below, and there is also a link to the generic tool list for the project as well, if that's something you're interested in and you need to get hold of some of the tools that we have here. So you're now ready to move on to the next lesson, which you can do so by clicking the link below. And if you haven't already, please press the subscribe button to the left-hand side of the video. I will see you in the next one.